And joining us now is Ontario's relatively new Minister for Research and Innovation. There's Glenn Murray, who's also the MPP for Toronto Centre. Welcome.
Thanks.
We wanted to get you in here because your ministry itself is only about 5 years old, and you are only a couple of months on the job, so it's all relatively new, and we wanted our viewers to get a better sense about what you and your ministry are up to. So what's the chief goal?
Wow. Productivity, that sort of elusive word that is improving the performance of the economy, creating more jobs in Ontario, and creating the pools of capital that we need to innovate. And in a nutshell, those are the objectives of what I've been charged with by the Premier.
Okay, since I guess the big report in 2008 was a couple of years ago that it came out, talked about what are the broad brush goals for the ministry, the economy has taken a major dive. Mm-hmm. So I wonder whether you have to adjust the innovation agenda in light of the fact that the economy just isn't what it was.
Well, it does. I mean, we're doing much better than almost any other state or province in North America.
Defined how?
Job creation, GDP growth. I have friends one of my buddies is in the New York State Senate, senior player in the Democratic Party there, who keeps on looking north and says, geez, I wish we were recovering as fast as you are. That is cold comfort to the people who are still unemployed or underemployed, but we're coming out of it faster. But the chronic underpinnings of the problems in the Canadian economy are there that have to get addressed or go beyond the downturn and need a more serious strategy than whether or not there was a recession or not. We'd still be having to manage change.
Okay, but lots of politicians in government talk about productivity, talk about job creation, talk about levers in the economy and so on. It seems to me like yours is a much more niche interest. I mean, innovation is a real, you got a relatively thin silo inside that government, right? So do you have to do something different in order to push innovation in the province?
Absolutely. Well, if we just take a step back for a moment and sort of understand the context, at least how I think the government see it. When I was born in 1957, I just turned 53 just a couple of weeks ago. Two-thirds of us made things for a living. We were a manufacturing industrial economy. And you remember industrial policy. We set tariffs and at the border, we controlled prices, we subsidized exports, we had marketing boards, right? And people worked for a company their whole lives, industrial fixed assets. You worked in a steel mill in Hamilton or Domtor in Cornwall. Today, that doesn't exist. People move around the world. Capital's moved around in split seconds. 80% of the jobs that are being created in the recovery are knowledge jobs. People don't make anything. They imagine, perform, finance, discover, engineer, research, manage, but they don't make stuff. So the mobility of capital and the mobility of people and our ability to retain those is what's driving that. So innovation is attached to thinking. It's like, why is Linamar so successful? Linda Hassenfrast, big auto parts manufacturer in Guelph. She says every single person who works for my company not only has to do their job, they're constantly rethinking their job.
Well, part of it is your government gave them a lot of money too.
That's right, absolutely. But I mean, her father started the company, in a lathe in the garage running off a washing machine. But the productivity piece is not about people working harder longer. It's about adapting technology. And the level of research and development that our major companies and our big employers are spending or investing in their future, and that's where we're weak. We don't have the R&D spending, and that's what we mean by productivity.
But I gather part of your responsibility is to champion innovation and to use whatever levers of government you have at your disposal to make it happen more.
We've gone into venture capital with leveraged partnerships, and now we're looking at new ideas. I mean, BC has had a tax credit that was much more specific than Ontario's was, and they've raised a lot of venture capital through a more, I would say, a more conservative, if I can use that word as a liberal, approach. Angel tax credits are working very, very well. So we really got to start to explore with the private sector what are the most effective mechanisms as we refresh this agenda to pool capital. We've done some creative things in the last few years with leveraging institutional investors through these collaborative funds that are bringing a lot of money to fund innovation and to fund new innovative startups and to help existing companies adapt innovation and new technologies more readily.
One thing I hear frequently from people is that we have no venture capital community in this province, and that this is a huge problem. If you're kind of a young person with a neat idea and you need to, you need $100,000 to start up, we just don't have. We don't have hundreds of people as they do in the States who are just prepared to, here's $1 million, go off and be creative. That's a problem for us, isn't it?
Well, it is, but we've had great success with the emerging technology funds, with the Ontario Venture Capital Fund. I just came back from Quebec. I spent a lot of time with Clément Gignac, who's my counterpart in the Quebec government. We've really got to start to look at the St. Lawrence corridor and starting to look at how we strategically work with other provinces in fiscal policy and others to do that. But we've got a huge challenge, and you're right. But we're also finding, I think, some new and better solutions. Kitchener-Waterloo, I find a fascinating place. You've got open text and RIM. You go out there, people have a very different culture about investment. They invest in each other's businesses, not just their own business. Some of them have bootstrapped themselves up. But I almost call it collaborative capitalism. It's sort of the barn-raising tradition of Mennonites.
Okay,
they've been very successful at that. So
that's
there's
an
other
interesting idea, though, because, which begs a follow-up, because RIM is one of those companies that I don't think, knocked on the door of the Ontario government and said, please give us some money and we'll innovate. They just did it.
No, they didn't. They actually got money from us.
How much did they get?
I don't remember. I think a couple $100,000. Maybe it was open text. I want to be careful. But I'm amazed when I've gone back through the ministry probably it was open text. Over the last 5 years, how many companies that are now, from Xenons and how many companies that are now emerging that the Ontario government, in the current iteration of the Premier's and Premier McGuinty's new ministry, more integrated, stronger ministry, I think, but how active the public and private sector have been in seeding some of these innovations. And everywhere in the world, you look at Singapore. Singapore is a country, I think, that as we're going through this innovation refresh we're looking at, they demonstrate new technologies. Their public sector infrastructure budgets are the first to adapt clean technologies in the world. You can go and probably see 17 of Canada's leading clean water tech and energy technologies in play in public facilities owned by the government of Singapore, probably more than you can find in North America.
Well, let me come back with this then. I was down at Mars the other day, and I was talking to one of their really top and very fine, internationally recognized researchers there who would probably prefer I not mention his or her name. And what he or she said was, I'm trying to keep the identity very murky here, this is a beautiful building. We have great relationships with Queen's Park. Queen's Park has made one heck of a commitment to this place, but this is not how innovation happens. Innovation happens in somebody's garage. And what we have here is gorgeous architecture and high rent and lots of, great relationships with Queen's Park, but this is not really the best way to get it done. Is that person right?
If that was the only way that we were doing it, yeah, that would, if it was a single track strategy.
You know what? As soon as I say that, I should say Mars, medical and related sciences. This is this, within the shadow of Queen's Park. This, what do you want to call it? Hothouse for innovation that
it is.
is down on College Street.
Dr. John Evans, who many of us will know. Yeah. Joe Rotman, a lot of people came together with some fairly big ideas about how we could do that. It's only 5 years old. It's produced some very exciting work in life sciences. It's way too early to, I think, say how successful that is, but we got to keep trying. I see a lot of convergence going on between different types of sciences and a lot of knowledge transfer. We have to understand that we're in this for the long-term game. Like, one of the things that we're looking at right now is quantum cryptography and communications, using your BlackBerry essentially replacing the ATM machine. The ATM machines are likely going to become the pay telephone booths of our generation. That could happen in Canada. I think we're very close to that. It's an early breakthrough that would restore. Many Ontarians don't realize that interbranch banking and automatic teller machines are a Toronto invention. They came out of our banking community. So we're trying to look at putting the banking community ahead. And why is that happening? Because of space research and space technology that Steve McLean is doing at the Canadian Space Agency, because of stuff happening with quantum cryptography at RIM and at University of Waterloo, and because our banking system, when it comes to security and technology, is one of the best in the world. That would mean huge numbers of new jobs in Kitchener-Waterloo, and that's a short-term gain. In the longer term, the big wins probably, we're likely going to be the country that's going to invent the first quantum computer, which is the next generation. I mean, it's so fast, it makes everything looks like an old dial telephone.
Well, let me ask a mundane question.
Sure.
Are our taxes low enough and are our regulations streamlined enough to encourage all that to happen?
Well, one of the people you might want to interview, and because no one believes politicians anymore, I've always got one hand tied behind my back, but there's a guy named Andrew Benedict, a professor at McMaster University. He started a company called Xenon, right? And he was, if you followed his career, a very brilliant entrepreneur. His company, I think, is now owned by GE. I'm not exactly sure, one of the big companies bought it. He used to complain a lot. He said this to me in Montreal. He said, I used to complain about Ontario. He said, I'm about to launch $1 billion company. He said, I've been out raising the capital for it. He's one of our most brilliant scientists and entrepreneurs. He said, I'm coming back to Ontario. He said, I have to tell you that I was a big critic of it, but there's no better place to start an innovation company in the world right now than Ontario.
How come?
He said, the enabling legislation here, the collaboration and openness of universities, the incredible support that you see that gave birth to the RIM and the open text, and the breakthrough in McMaster where we can now turn skin cells into blood. I mean, the level of innovation here is so rich. The community is, there are so many collaborative communities within the Ontario government. His advice to us is have more confidence, have more hope, realize that you're in for a longer game, and as more Ontarians get exposed to some of the more hostile areas for investment and innovation, home will seem a lot more, a much richer place to invest in.
Let me follow up on that then, because we are, well, I'm going to read this for you. Ivor Tossell wrote this in the Globe and Mail not too long ago, and I'll read that and then we'll come out of this with a question. A lack of local venture capital is a long-standing complaint, but entrepreneurs say that money itself isn't the problem. Toronto, traditionally a buttoned-down financial capital, needs a cultural shift. And that goes for its venture capitalists as well as entrepreneurs. Now, our kind of risk aversion turned out to be pretty good when the whole financial sector melted down and our banks are pretty stable, unlike a lot of those players on Wall Street. That having been said, is our culture too risk averse to innovate as much as we need to?
Somewhat.
That's a pretty careful answer. I thought the answer was yes.
Let me, it's funny because I sat, as you know, I grew up in Montreal, I lived in Ontario, went to Manitoba, came back to Ontario. I used to look down the highway when I was mayor of Winnipeg with a certain amount of frustration. I said, what could we do in our city if we had all the major banks headquartered here? And we've been a bit rewarded for our risk aversion. Montreal melted down. I lived in Montreal when the Parti Québécois got elected and Sun Life emptied out and all the jokes and the seriousness about the Brinks trucks coming down, and up grew Toronto as the financial capital. And that was sort of reinforced with the last meltdown, where our financial sector was much more resilient. We call ourselves the integrity banking capital of the world right now because New York. Now there's some reasons, and some of those precautions are probably good. But unless we get institutional investors, like our banks, and so much of our money is held in pension funds, which are generally much more conservative investors, unless we can get that kind of pool of capital, unless we can get our banks behaving the way that the community of investors in Kitchener-Waterloo that are creating all those ICT and digital media companies, unless we get our capital in the private sector more mobilized, we're going to be at a strategic disadvantage.
How do you do that?
Well, that's part of my job, right? So, the Ontario Venture Capital Fund, the Emerging Technology Funds, we've got them to the table, the fund of funds, as partners.
What's your budget?
My budget per year is probably we probably have about $500 million. The commitment that we're in the middle of spending is a $3.2 billion commitment. So it's pretty significant ministry commitment by the Premier. There's not too many other people that have that. So we're building up, I think, better and stronger than many others are. We're trying a number of different things. We actually have a very entrepreneurial government. Our life sciences strategy, some of the tax incentives that we've been looking at.
What about our post-secondary institutions, though? Because I know if you talk to young people, even those who are graduating from those great computer engineering programs, they will say that they are encouraged to go get a job with a big, innovation company like RIM or something like that, rather than start your own thing. And again, does that not show to you that even in post-secondary, where everybody's supposed to be cutting edge and thinking futuristically, we're still kind of thinking conventionally?
I'm not sure we are. Waterloo is a really interesting place. Each professor owns their own intellectual property rights there. And whether it's institutional owned or professor owned is really less important. But they make decisions at that university in 3 months for investment.
I know, but this is the 5th time you've mentioned Kitchener or Waterloo or something like that. And the fact is, it's a big province with lots of different regions, right, and with 5 or 6 different economies, right?
Exactly.
I know the Innovation Triangle is doing great, but what about the Northwest? What about the North, Southwest, Eastern Ontario?
I think part of it is how do we export from Kitchener-Waterloo that culture of innovation? Because I think we've done very well on investing in the researcher and the entrepreneur. I think we're doing pretty well on investments in the company and the cluster. one of the biggest things that we're working on is how do you create the culture of innovation in a community? And if I can just give you a quick comparison, Kitchener-Waterloo, of the 100 most innovative companies in Canada by most rankings, 9 of them, 10 of them are in Kitchener-Waterloo. Queen's University, which we're very proud of, has generated Partech, which is the 4th-ranked business incubator, university-based incubator in the world, one of the best commercialization programs, probably the best in Canada. Starts lots of new companies. Few of them stay in Kingston for more than 3 or 4 years. There's no receptors. Kingston is about prisons. It's about hospitals. It's about the military. And those are wonderful institutions, but they tend not to be the kinds of things, the culture that promotes small and medium enterprises, the way that Pittsburgh has transformed itself, or Portland, Oregon.
Right.
So we have to look at the Hamiltons and the Kingstons that have different challenges and look at how do we find the financial folks, the professionals, and the cultural support for small, medium enterprise incubation.
Is it your job to pick winners?
No, I think it's our job to try and create fiscal policy and the investments, 120,000 new positions in universities, working with universities to connect universities and researchers better to innovators, which is the ONE network. I don't know you've been following that.
Yeah, sure.
We've been launching these regional innovation centers.
What does ONE stand for?
The Ontario Network of Excellence, which is getting these organizations to connect to where the capital is, where the business mentoring is, where the talent they need is, where the professional services they need is. So what we're trying to do is, in some ways, take some of the success of some of the communities that we've had, like Kitchener-Waterloo, which I think is extraordinary in North America, not just in Ontario. I really think they've got the knowledge culture of entrepreneurship and shared capital and collaborative investment. People don't see that just investing in their business, but in their cluster. That's starting to happen in Hamilton. That's where Tom Jenkins from OpenText comes from. That's where Andrew Benedict came from. McMaster University can be to Hamilton, is becoming to Hamilton what Carnegie Mellon became to Pittsburgh after Pittsburgh lost 243,000 steel jobs in '83 and '84.
They make no steel in Pittsburgh anymore.
But they make a lot of life sciences.
Yeah.
And so we think Hamilton's much stronger. I think McMaster, in my view, is a better university than Carnegie Mellon. I think we're producing the knowledge leaders, the Andrew Benedicts and the Tom Jenkins, David Wilkinson, who has just had, is one of the leaders in advanced composite materials, new materials that are lighter and stronger to make our cars and our airplanes and our buses that we make in Ontario. So that's the kind of innovation transfer that's coming out of McMaster. You won't see that in huge gains in new jobs yet in Hamilton, but 3, 4, 5 years out, you will, and we're on track to that. This is only a 5-year-old ministry. Mars is only 5 years old. The Perimeter Institute, which is now the leading center for quantum physics and theoretical physics in the world, beats Harvard, beats Stanford, beats Oxford, is only 10 years old.
So the message for the moment is
So the moment is we're doing well in Ontario. We're maybe later in the game because our productivity loss started in the 90s, and under, quite frankly, much worse under previous governments. We're now trying to close that gap. But Ontarians, not their government, their government's been supported, but Ontarians are doing really well in clean tech. These institutions are all new. They're just starting to pay us dividends, but we've had the courage to make some tough decisions that didn't have early returns, but had the longer term returns that are richer and create more jobs because we took a longer view.
I have known you long enough and well enough to know that if I don't jump in here, you're going to keep going. And we have to get to other things.
Great.
So Glenn Murray, I'm going to thank you for coming in today.
Steve, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Good to see you again. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.